This will be our second monsoon season in the high deserts of northern Arizona. And even though we've already carved out a good amount of rainwater harvesting structures and different earthworks on the property, we've still got a whole lot of different concepts to incorporate and to add diversity in capturing all the rainwater that we can. So I want to show you the hybrid concept that we've actually incorporated in between two of our swales, and it's how we're doing things in this area that are actually going to help create more efficient water harvesting and water capturing in this area so we can further grow more vegetation. What's going on, everyone? I'm Brandon, and this is the Greening the Desert Project. We're in the midst of the summertime here, and it's been really hot. We've gotten into the triple digits, and it's been pretty dry too. And looking back at my rain logs on the calendar, we haven't actually gotten significant rain for about a month. So I'm really anticipating that we're gonna get some good rain, hopefully soon, because we're just getting into July, and usually from the locals, that's when the time that we're usually getting the more significant storms. But in the meantime, I've been able to look back on last year's footage of monsoon season and see a lot of these different areas where we got a lot of sheet flow, but also in spots where we had limited sheet flow and we had a lot more absorption. And I know there's a lot of permaculture experts out there that really highly suggest on the observation part, we really don't understand our property or our landscape with the climate and everything really until almost the 2-year mark. And that's if we're more full-time on the property, we have that much more insight. And so that goes for myself, that I've gotten a fair amount of insight from last year's monsoon and just the weather patterns that we have experienced and just the different vegetation that has started to grow in the last couple years. Which, for those that don't know, not only are we doing these earthworks or these rainwater harvesting structures to help get more water soaked into the ground to grow vegetation, but we're also practicing rotational grazing with our goats as well as our chickens. And so with our livestock, we're actually utilizing them in creating more of a spongy, healthy soil, because for the most part, we have really sandy or sandy loam soil. So we have really good high draining soil. With the rotational grazing, we've already had our goats rotated in most of this southern portion so far. So this area has already been fertilized with the goat manure and also with the hay and the straw mixed in. So we've got a nice little soil mixture already to start with. We do get a lot of sheet flow in some spots, and a big contributor is the caliche or the hardpan layer that we have below our surface. But then we're also looking at a lot of these different big rock outcroppings that are definitely blocking the water from penetrating further down. And it's with all of these different variables in our landscape that we get to experience why the landscape is the way it is and why it's eroded away the way it has. So that's where all these different organic and permaculture practices come in, so that we have this full force, or that we have this full toolbox of all these different structures and different techniques and practices that we can do. So right here in this area that I'm at, this is our southern portion of our property. And I've explained many times that it's our southern portion that had actually experienced a fire probably about 50 to 100 years ago and hasn't since recovered fully. So you could think that our southern portion here is actually in need of the most help, in need of most of these practices and techniques. But where I'm standing, we're actually going to start segregating different spots on the landscape to give people a better idea of where we're at on the property and just these different locations, so that we can come back in the future and have reference to the before and the after. Because we're going to be attempting to grow or dry farm wheat in this general area because it has a little bit more clay content in the soil. But then also because we have these bigger gaps in between our larger swales that are on contour, so we already are able to slow a large volume of the water that does sheet flow. But now we're going to start adding micro earthworks into this area so that we can further slow all of the water and get it more segregated into these areas to get more surface area absorption into the landscape. So that's where we're going to combine keyline design. And if you've never heard of keyline design, keyline is usually used more so when we're thinking of conventional agriculture. And with conventional agriculture, it's tilling, it's the rows of crops. But when we're adding keyline design to agriculture, we're actually going to start plowing our lines or planting our vegetation more on contour, and we're going to start working with the hills and the valleys of our landscape. And this essentially is just a way to make more efficient use of the hills and valleys of our landscape. And this works more so when we have a slight gentle or just a more gentle slope to our landscape, something that's easy for us to cultivate different crops, whether it be wheat or even vegetables. And it's with Keyline that we're taking advantage of the valleys as well, because these are going to be these spots that are termed Keyline spots. And this is where the slope actually levels off more so. And these leveled off points are usually where we find the most abundant sources of sediment, silt, and clay. So it's kind of hard to get an idea of the contours of our landscape, but as I start drawing out our contour lines, it'll actually give you a lot better detail, the curves and just the level points on this portion of the property. And that's where I'm actually taking this hybrid approach. So we're using Keyline design. We're going to dig these mini check dams. And from these different mini check dam points, these are points where when water is able to gather up, it's actually going to help disperse it more into the higher portions of the landscape or the hills of this area. And actually what makes this project more fun is that it's way more simple. So we've got a simple A-frame and we've got a shovel and a pickaxe. And so the hybrid approach that I've taken with the Keyline design are these rock check dams are going to feed these contour lines so that we get more water soaked into the uphill portion. But then also in between the swales, we'll actually carve out our row lines so that we can start planting wheat. What should we call this? If you have an idea of what we should call this area, leave it in the comments below. There's definitely a lot of people that think that digging deeper or bigger earthworks, the better. I actually disagree, because we can do a hybrid mixture. We can do bigger earthworks in areas that we know is a huge influx of water, or we're directing a large inflow of water. But it's also depending on our landscape with our soil, our drainage and everything that does determine how high we need to make berms or how deep we need to dig these. So that's what makes every part of our landscape very unique in the different kinds of earthworks or the diversity of earthworks that we'll be doing. So I've already gone ahead and marked out with the A-frame. I've marked out the contour lines so we have an idea of where the water flow is and how we can spread it a little bit more evenly in this area. And that's what made it easy, is that once I had the line drawn out, then we're just taking the shovel and we're just kind of plowing through to make our line. And then we'll kind of tidy things up and make everything a little bit more defined. But that's how simple all of this can be. We can get a whole lot of these earthworks done that can be done in a day. And now it makes this area that much more efficient in capturing, harvesting, and soaking more water into the ground and landscape. And now that's kind of the best part too with drawing out our contour lines, because now we'll have a gauge or at least a reference so that we can carve further lines on contour uphill, and then we don't have to use the A-frame the whole time either. Taking our Keyline hybrid design here, since hopefully we're going to be experiencing some of the monsoon storms, getting major moisture, this will be the time that we will want to start planting stuff so that it does have a good chance of germinating. And now that we've got this area somewhat finalized, have all of the swales carved out that we need and the basins, and that's where these micro earthworks and taking advantage of the Keyline concept, that's where hopefully we'll have a higher success rate, and it'll be exciting to actually see towards the end of monsoon what we can grow and how successful a lot of these different diversity of earthworks or rainwater harvesting structures do. So now hopefully you have a good example of what Keyline design is and how these actually take the combination of permaculture earthworks for slowing, stopping, and spreading the water out. But it's the adaptability of all these rainwater harvesting structures that make them unique in the design features depending on the location. And we've got the example of digging in an area that has very little rock, lots of sediment, and a lot of clay. But when we start moving to other parts of our property, we'll find that we're gonna run into a lot of these rocks and rock outcroppings. So the approach that we're gonna take is gonna be way different. And the design features for our goal of harvesting as much water are going to be completely different from this southern portion. We already have a lot of established pinyon pine trees on the property, and a lot of these happen to be growing on our northern portion, which has the abundance of rocks everywhere. So we're actually going to take a special approach with the pine trees